Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. So today, we're diving deep into Isabel Wilkerson's masterpiece, The Warmth of Other Suns. And we're going to look at the Great Migration a little differently. Not just as, a simple journey, but as this massive exodus from a system that was specifically designed to trap people. It's really the story of 6 million individuals making a collective decision to break free. To really get why they left, we've got to understand the world they were so desperate to escape. We'll start by looking at the sealed social order of the Jim Crow South. Then we'll meet some of the people who lived under its immense pressure, see how they finally released that valve, and explore how the system adapted. Which brings us to our final point, a crisis in perception. All right, first up, a sealed social order. We're calling this the pressure cooker of the Jim Crow South. And that's key because you really have to think of it less as a place with just random prejudice and more like a meticulously designed machine. Yeah, the best way to picture it is as a sealed pressure cooker. See, this was an economic and social system engineered from the ground up to trap labor, restrict any kind of movement, and absolutely crush dissent. And you can just imagine, inside that container, for decade after decade, the pressure just kept building and building. And this wasn't just about prejudice. Wilkerson defines it as a rigid caste system, a fixed hierarchy that you were born into and you could never, ever escape. It trapped millions, from sharecroppers to aspiring doctors, in a kind of social prison where any sign of ambition could literally be a death sentence. I mean, this created an unbearable, constant pressure. So how can we possibly see the inner workings of a system that massive? Well, we see it through the people who lived inside of it. Wilkerson shows us the system through the eyes of 3 people who witnessed its cruelty firsthand. You have Ida May, trapped in the endless cycle of sharecropping debt. You have George Starling, who risked his life just for asking for fair pay. And Robert Foster, a brilliant surgeon whose dreams were completely blocked by a racial ceiling. You see, their stories aren't just personal tragedies. They're like X-rays of the system, revealing exactly where the pressure was most intense. Economic exploitation, suppressed ambition, and violent total control. So what do you do when the pressure becomes unbearable? Well, you find a way to release the valve. And for millions, that meant making the only rational choice available to them, getting out. And this is where the Great Migration just breaks all the rules. Standard migration theory says people usually move the shortest distance possible. But for Black Southerners, a short move wasn't nearly enough to escape the system's grip. Their calculation was entirely different. For them, a great distance was absolutely necessary. It was the only way to escape the system's reach. So they didn't just move to the next town over. They crossed the entire continent. And over 6 decades, nearly 6 million people effectively voted with their feet, finally releasing the valve on that southern pressure cooker. People weren't just leaving. They were escaping. This wasn't about finding seasonal work. As the Cleveland Advocate wrote back in 1917, it was a regular exodus, with people leaving forever. This was a headless, leaderless movement, a mass action of individual decisions that became one of the most significant demographic shifts in American history.
But here's the thing. Escaping the South didn't mean escaping systemic pressure entirely. The system simply changed its form.
As Wilkerson shows us, migrants arrived in the so-called Promised Land, only to walk directly into what she calls a headwind of resentment and suspicion, a new, more subtle version of the very system they had just fled. The system adapted. So instead of whites-only signs, there were these invisible lines drawn by housing covenants that created segregated neighborhoods. Instead of explicit laws, there was the unspoken rule of last hired, first fired. The pressure was still there. It was just in a different uniform. The rules were less obvious, for sure, but the goal was the same: maintain a social hierarchy. And this resilience of these deep social structures brings us to the core of the issue, how we perceive this history. So how do we choose to see the story? Do we see millions of individual stories of ambition, or do we see a collective story of systemic escape? Well, the answer, of course, is both, but how we frame it matters immensely. You see, when this migration is framed purely as millions of individual stories of personal aspiration, the coercive architecture that made departure necessary in the first place, it just disappears from view. That fragmentation is a crisis in perception. The real power of Wilkerson's work is that it forces us to see both the person and the prison they escaped. We have to see the incredible bravery of individuals like Ida May, George, and Robert, and we have to see the oppressive design of the system that demanded such bravery in the first place. As the scholar Lawrence Rogers put it, it was this simple act of walking away, multiplied by millions, that fundamentally altered American history.
Their departure wasn't just a flight from the South. It was a reclamation of agency, a way of negotiating with an unyielding system. Wilkerson's work helps us see that mobility isn't just about isolated ambition. It is a powerful response to the structures that shape our lives. And the decision of these 6 million people to simply walk away, well, it reconfigured the entire country. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. And if you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.